Welcome back to the channel, guys. Thank you for tuning in. This week is going to be a little different. We're not building anything. We're not remodeling anything. This week, I'm going to go over the 10 do's and don'ts of using a table saw. So let's walk over to my table saw and jump right into it. Okay, now that we're over by the table saw, before we start the list and get to number one, you really need to know the limitations of your saw and what it's really capable of, whether you have a small job site table saw, a contractor saw like this, or a big giant saw stop cabinet table saw. The more you know the capabilities of your saw, the less likely of injury is going to occur. And before we start this list, I know there's a ton of do's and don'ts. These are just the ones that I've come up with. So let's hop into number one. All right, number one, it's do please, when cutting, stand to the left of your blade. As you're running your material through your saw, remember that saw's spinning towards you. And as you get halfway through, that saw blade is actually pulling the material down. But as you go past that halfway point, it's actually lifting it up. And more times than not, when kickback happens, it's always going to be to the right of the blade, and you're going to get a nice piece of board right in the belly. All right, and for my first don't, I see it a lot, especially on YouTube. Someone's got their piece cut into two pieces, and what do? As this blade is spinning, they reach over the blade. Now you reach over the blade to bring your piece back, you happen to forget you didn't shut that saw off, boom, you're gonna hit your arm. So please don't reach over a spinning blade. For our next do, number two, you always want to keep your blade height just over the height of the material you're cutting. And what I like to do is I'll bring my blade all the way down, so it's just under, and then just over the top. The reason we do this is it keeps, the motor has to work a lot less to cut through the material, and it prevents injury. So heaven forbid you don't follow that rule number one, you go to reach over the blade, you're less likely to hit this saw blade than it would be if it was miles above your workpiece. So do number two, keep the saw blade just over your material height. And for our next don't, or number two don't, or number four, whatever you want to call it, try or don't wear any kind of loose material, loose jewelry, sleeves. Typically I roll my sleeves up if I'm doing something, especially when people wear hoodies and they go to reach over and those tassels hang down. That could easily be caught in the blade. Also, people with long hair, ladies, gentlemen, please keep that hair pulled back. That way you're not getting sucked into the blade. It's a very, very easy and preventable injury from happening. I know now certain companies even make hoodies for like workshops. I think Brunt, they don't have tassels, they have the buttons. It's a very easy way to stay safe in the shop. All right, and for my next do is please use some sort of push stick. Preferably one that hooks onto the end and reaches out on your project. I have two examples here. That way you have a little bit more control. If worst case to worst, if you don't have one of those, these do come in handy, but they are a little bit more, I try to stay away from these because they typically, you don't push with an even pressure. And if you push from here, your project tends to pull to the left, or you can't keep it square with your project. So worst case to worst, yes, you can use these kind of push sticks, but I prefer, I got this, you can always have a fancy one. This is from John Malecki. Something that reaches over and has more pressure on your projects. I even like using the gripper. You can adjust to where your blade is, Or even if you're cutting dados, you get a little push block. I have multiple versions of these, but these work great as well. Again, nice, even pressure on your projects, and you can able to push it through. So, when I do, please use some sort of push block. And for my next don't is please don't try to cut thin strips on the right side of your saw blade. It's very hard to keep constant pressure on your material and slide that thin piece through without having to kind of stick your fingers or stick a pencil in there or something thin to kind of guide that along. And heaven forbid you do actually make that cut, 9 times out of 10, it's going to pinch against your saw blade or your fence and shoot back at you. Now what I do recommend you do is go ahead, and now a lot of companies are making these, there's just a thin rip guide. All it does is it slides into the grooves you have on your table saw. Now this is just a cheap one that I got off Amazon. Woodworker makes them, Jessen makes them, everyone makes them nowadays. You set to your thickness, and all you do is after every cut, you make a cut, move the blade over, and it lines up on these bearings that it has and just rides along it. Much safer cut and much easier to do. So for my next, I guess, is try to get a zero clearance insert for your table saw. What this does, this prevents anything kind of from, as you're cutting maybe small pieces, from slipping and getting pinched by the blade and shot back out of you. As you can see, this is my zero clearance insert that I got it off of Amazon. I got a whole pack with a dado one and a zero clearance as well. This, as you can see the difference, this is the original, this is the zero clearance. And if I throw the original back in, if I remember how to do it. There is more space for, like I said, strips to fall in, get caught. Also, a zero clearance is gonna leave a cleaner cut on your projects as well. So again, see if you can swap out your original throw plate for a zero clearance. Again, got this on Amazon. I pretty much just put in my model number and it pops up. Everyone makes these. I'm pretty sure this is just made out of NVF. For my next don't is make sure if you're cross-cutting, you're not cross-cutting with your material pinched against your fence and the table blade. These small pieces do like to become projectiles, and you could catch one right in the noggin. What I recommend you do is set up a false fence or a sacrificial fence along it. That way when you cross-cut, it gives this small piece somewhere to fall. That way you can keep cutting and not having to worry about this thing becoming a projectile. So enjoy. Okay, for our next two is you always want to start your saw correctly. You want to make sure your project or your material is flat all the way against the fence. That way you're not, pushing and crooked with the potential of it either binding against your fence, binding against the blade. Like I said, make sure it's nice and flat all the way against your fence and nice even pressure all the way through. And following that we're gonna follow with a big don't. Make sure the material you are running through your table saw is properly milled. You don't want it to have any cupping, bowing, twisting, anything that's gonna prevent you from having this laid flat and against the fence. I've seen time and time again where someone tries to use rough sawn lumber through their table saw and it binds, it pinches, it kicks back, and you can have a very serious injury. All right, folks, so those are my 10 do's and don'ts of the table saw. Let me know what you think. This is a little bit different than what I usually do. Don't forget to please like, comment, and subscribe down below. Let me know if you can think of any other do's and don'ts. Thanks for tuning in, guys, and I'll see you guys on the next video. Peace.